Hi, I'm Sam Candy. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Griffiths, Director of Policy and Partnership at Planet Mark and Chair of the Institute of Directors National Sustainability Task Force. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
That's lovely to be here, Sam. Lovely to hang out.
Good to see you. Good to see you. I just want to start, as I do with all of my guests, hearing a little bit more. I mean, that was a very, very short introduction, but please tell us more about you, what you do, the company you work for, and yeah, how you got here.
Yeah, no. So I'm with Planet Mark, and we're a sustainability certification for organizations and for real estate. So we help as a mark of progress, really. So organizations, there's 650 plus organizations who certify with us, have to demonstrate that they are reducing their emissions year on year in order to recertify each year. And we have a very good success rate of achieving that. And I guess my particular role is sort of on the partnership side. So we work with a lot of trade associations like the Royal Warrant Holders, like the Institute of Directors, and a wide variety of others from a variety of sectors. And it's essentially sort of supporting them with their industry on how do we support their community to become more sustainable, to go net zero, all of that good stuff. And then on the policy side, it's looking at how do we engage in and react to policies as they're emerging. So things like the ISO net zero guidelines that was just launched at COP, sort of we're part of the Race to Zero campaign, but also there's lots of legislation coming down the pipeline that's going to affect businesses in quite a pronounced way. And so we look to make sure that we're supporting our members as much as we can with understanding that. And that's part of my team's remit.
Good. I always, again, something I like to ask my guests is what sustainability means to you personally.
Yeah, well, I guess so the simplest definition of sustainability is that we're taking actions and doing things that we could in principle keep doing forever at a level that could be sustained forever. Ultimately, unsustainable behaviors are things that are out of balance with the geophysical limits of our natural environment in particular, but also our social environment. You know, what things place too much pressure onto a society. And so our sustainable transition is a balance of variables where we've got to try and, you know, what's the fastest that we can adapt and change and transition to, you know, minimize the climate change risks that we face and minimize the negative impacts of that. What's the fastest we can achieve that? But equally, what's the fastest that we can move and the fastest that we can transition while having sort of minimal transition risk of you know it sort of really taking industries by surprise, or you know leaving people sort of cut adrift and stranded assets and stranded people. So we have to sort of achieve a balance of how fast we can move in order for it to be the right transition for us.
Do you think we can move fast, or do you think like how fast do we need to move, and how, you know, like people often sort of don't believe in climate change or don't think that what they do is going to make a difference. How fast do you think we need to move? Can we move fast enough? Talk a little bit about that.
So firstly, I'll sort of address can people make a difference? And the one sort of in one sense, the wonderful thing about taking climate action is that at some level, every single small, tiny step you take, every single action makes a measurable difference. You know, every time that you choose to walk to the station instead of drive, every time that you choose to turn the heating down a bit, every time that you choose to make sure that you're switching off the lights when you're not in rooms, every single one of those actions in principle adds up to, because of the way that every single thing has a carbon emission, and we have this carbon budget of this is the amount that we can in theory use before we will cross the threshold of 1.5 degrees into very unsafe territory where there are natural processes that we believe will start to amplify the effects of climate change. Every single little thing that you do might reduce the amount of warming by 0.0000001 degrees or something. And yes, it's very small, but when you start to see it like every single little choice that I make, it has a measurable impact. And in that sense, there's a real sort of sense of hope of it, because it's about aggregate effects and aggregate change. And so how fast do we need to move? We need to move fast, for sure. Like we need to move at a faster rate than we have on just about anything before. But I guess the sort of thing that I find hope in is someone was talking to me the other day, and like they're talking about the moonshot project back in the 1960s. And when JFK stood on the stage and said, in 10 years we will land on the moon, 1959. They achieved that goal in 1969. The remarkable thing about that is that when JFK stood on that stage, less than half of the technology that was required to get us to the moon existed. So, and they managed it in 10 years. So it's one of these things where, how are we going to make these kinds of changes by 2050? 2050 is quite, it's not that far away, but on the other side, it's quite far away. And people often, overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10. And that's very true of us as a civilization. And so I'm personally quite excited to see how fast we can move, particularly now that the money, in the financial system is really moving toward investing in this, because the financial system has very much woken up to the risk to the economy, and the fact that you can't have an economy on a planet that's uninhabitable for humanity.
Yeah, I think, and you say, this, and I agree with you. I think that the technologies that are coming now and the investment that's being made, and we're starting to see things coming out that every year that are new, that we haven't heard of. And I believe even in the next sort of 10 years that we're going to be in a completely different place, and that we're going to see new technologies. You just have to look at the way EVs have progressed so much, and there's a lot more work to go there. But do you think 2050 is too far? A lot of people are setting net zero goals to 2050, but some people say that we need to be really drastic in the next 7 years.
Yeah, absolutely. The short-term progress is kind of the most important piece, and it's an easy way. Like the good sort of the way you can put this into a sort of a relatable context is that pensions, like we're all told, when you get out of university, invest in your pension as early as possible, because the miracles of compound interest, right? In that the longer you are putting into your pension, the greater that the interest compounds, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And actually, the length of time that you are investing in your pension has a substantial effect upon the outcome. The same is true, but in a kind of negative context for emissions. The more we put in right now, it has a compounding effect. The more that goes in now, the more action we will have to take later, because we move the finish line kind of closer towards us. I.e., the more we burn and the more we emit now, the nearer the end of our carbon budget is, and the faster we will have to sprint to make sure that we don't cross that line, and sort of the faster we end up having to move. So we have to be very careful. And arguably at a global level, yes, 2050, I would say it's too late. I think people are already worried about that. And I think in the minds of businesses and in the minds of of governments, we really, the thing, yes, okay, set a 2050 target. But the thing I'm most interested in is, what's your plan in the next year? Number one. What's your plan in the next 3 to 5 years? Number two. And what's your plan by 2030? number three, and that because it's a far more realistic timescale. Because one of the really interesting things is like, imagine asking a business, can you show me your business plan for what your business will, how your business will still be making money in 2050? No one does that. Not even the big companies do that. It's just way too far away. Like, so why are you confident that your business will still be making money in 2050? The reason I'm confident in that is because my business plan that I do on an annual basis and my business plan that I do on a 5-year or a 10-year basis, that gives me confidence that I have the right strategy in place. That means I'm going to continue to grow over the next year and the next year and the next year. So it's the systems we have in place on a far more short-term basis that gives us confidence in our viability at a later date, not that we've set a target for a later date. We've got the strategy to achieve that by 2050. So it just doesn't work like that. And I think our engagement on sustainability and reducing carbon emissions needs to become far more about the reason I'm confident I'm going to be net zero by 2050 at the latest is that the processes I have in place today will get me there.
Yeah.
Because it's a self-correcting, self-perpetuating system of governance inside what I'm doing day to day, year on year, in my 5-year plan, all of those things. So that's what we need to see is far more short-term governance structures that give us confidence in the end outcome.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I always say to companies that saying, oh, we're going to do this by 2050. I'm like, you sure you're even going to have the same leadership team and board and CEO by that time?
Well,
and you're making
won't.
decisions that people aren't even going to be in your company.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but for businesses, it can be challenging for them to, everyone's got sustainability on their websites now. It is part of most businesses have a strategy in place, or they're thinking about putting a strategy in place, or they're trying to educate themselves as quick as possible or bring people in that can help. What do you think the biggest challenges are for businesses that are on their sustainable journey or starting out even?
I think businesses' biggest challenges are businesses' biggest challenges. It sort of doesn't matter. It's not the challenges that they face within sustainability are the same as they face within every other sort of facet of their business, especially at the moment. So the biggest challenges for business right now is there's a cost of living and cost of doing business crisis, where with energy rocketing in the UK, the sort of energy relief scheme is coming to an end. It will be replaced by an energy discount scheme, but it means that energy costs are going to go up again for businesses in April. So I think the cost of living crisis and cost of energy in particular is hitting businesses hard, and just the time and the resource. The big stuff. We've done a white paper that will be released in the very near future, looking at what are the challenges and the opportunities that small and medium-sized businesses have to achieve net zero. And the big challenges really are about resource. And interestingly, for like smaller businesses, it's not necessarily a question of budget, of money. It's more a question of time. Investing the time with a limited team. How do I invest the time in wrapping my head around that? And that leads to the second big challenge, which is that there is actually not at this stage that there's not enough information. It's that there's too much information that's not well enough curated for small businesses to look at. So there's so many different potential sources, so many different places you could read on what you're supposed to do and the top tips and this and that and the other. And we need to have a far more consistent approach to having, a gospel of this is what you need to do as a business. Here are your opportunities. Here are your no-cost, initiatives that you can do. Here are your low-cost initiatives. This will be what the return on investment will be. And so I think, to address the biggest challenges, really focus in on the low-hanging fruit that it improves your sustainability, yes, but it also just fundamentally helps the functioning of your business by reducing your costs or by increasing your profitability. And so, the cheapest unit of energy is the one that you don't use. So if you can do cost saving initiatives, they are having very rapid payback periods now. If there's anything you need to spend on it, the solar panels have gone from being a payback period of like 7 to 10 years to being like 1 to 3 years now. I've had business leaders saying to me, look, back when it used to be 7 to 10 years, that was already a better investment of money than most things I would invest my money in. But now it's practically a business plan in its own right. Like, I'm getting me as many of these things as I can. I'll be making money on it within a few years. So it's, yeah, I think invest in the things that are gonna help on all counts, really align and focus in on what's going to make a difference for your business fastest, and ultimately then contribute to reducing your emissions as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. You were last year at COP27, one of the people that went along. What were your, and I personally, I've seen your videos and your thoughts on it, but I'd really like to share it with my community. What you thought from start to finish, like an overall view of going there.
Yeah, I mean, so it was interesting, COP27, because I attended COP26 in Glasgow as well. Safe to say it was very different. Sharm el Sheikh is an interesting place to host a COP because it felt a bit like an Egyptian Las Vegas. It's very resorty, casinos and big hotel resorts, and sorts of things like that. And it's all along one strip along the coast. And yeah, the best things that happened at COP were the stuff that happened around COP more so than what happened in it. There were logistically, it was something of a shambles in terms of none of the volunteers knew where anything was. They were still building a lot of the site 3 or 4 days in. So there was sort of construction going on all around us for the first sort of half of the first week. They ran out of food and water in their blue zone at one point, which I don't know about you, but if you've got sort of, the negotiators for all of your different countries working on sort of one of the most important deals in human history, I don't make the best decisions when I'm hungry. I certainly not when I'm thirsty. So, like, I'm not sure we want our climate negotiators hangry while they're debating with each other about what we should be doing. So, it wasn't the best sort of setup from a logistical standpoint. But in terms of outcomes, the summit itself, the only thing that moved forward really was the creation of the loss and damage fund, which essentially was official recognition that the countries who are getting hit hardest by the effects of climate change are not the ones who have contributed most to the problem. And so there needs to be some kind of, when countries like Pakistan get submerged, a third of the country underwater with billions and billions of dollars worth of damage done, they should not be alone in helping to foot the bill to repair from that damage. And that's really what the loss and damage is about. It's about supporting countries who are hit hardest by the effects of climate change so that they don't end up in a spiral where their economy and their country sort of kind of collapses as a result of these impacts. So that's why it was created. But at the moment, there's still not much specifics. We don't know who's going to pay, how much, by when, who will draw from the fund, and how they'll get the money and when they'll get the money. All of that detail is yet to be decided. A working group was set up that are working on it this year, and that's going to be continue to be one of the really big topics at COP28. And there will be a lot of heated debates about all of that for various reasons. But that was the only thing that really moved forward. Everything else, we kind of stood still, which the wording of the COP26 agreement wasn't really moved forward. We didn't expand our, the COP26 document said that we would seek to phase down unabated coal and inefficient or ineffective fossil fuel subsidies. That wording stayed the same. there were pushes to make it broader. India and Pakistan led the charge on saying, can we please broaden the phase down unabated coal to phase down all fossil fuels to make it more sort of across the board. And oil-rich nations stopped that coming through. And there were pushes to try and make it phase out, which was the original hope on the wording, rather than phase down, because phase down is very subjective. Phase out is very clear about the end goal. And again, we didn't get movement on that. So in climate negotiation terms, standing still is the same thing as moving backwards, because again, remembering what I said about that, the finish line gets harder. You know, that when you delay another year making a decision to progress forward, the action that you're going to have to take in later years becomes more intense, more extreme. You have to go far more quickly and far more ambitiously in order to compensate the fact that you took longer to make the decision. So think of it as like, imagine standing still on a treadmill. What's going to happen? You're going to fall off the back. You know, you are moving backwards if you're standing still. You need to be progressing forwards continuously, and that's the point of the COP summits, is that they're meant to move us forward each year in ambition, and it didn't do that.
So given the effort that goes into producing it and the amount of people that attend, that fly over there, with the outcomes that came from it, is it worth it?
I don't necessarily see an alternative to. We need international discussion and agreement. One of the interesting questions is, because currently the COP becomes a little bit of a circus, because what it was meant to be is this is where the United Nations negotiations are happening between countries, and that's the blue zone. But then the green zone is where all the business and public engagement happens. And these days, COP gets kind of confused by particularly the general public, because there's this whole kind of posturing and there's all this business stuff going on the side. And there's a question as to how much should we be having this business engagement thing alongside these negotiations, because it becomes a bit of a distraction from what we're actually trying to achieve, which is you know, more legislative sort of intergovernmental agreement and negotiations. That's not actually about directly engagement businesses there necessarily. And so one of the question marks was, should we separate the two? And there should be, you know, COP summit should be about the negotiations and negotiations alone. And then at another time of year in another place, you have the, you know, climate business world fair kind of thing. And interestingly, we're kind of seeing movement on that, in that the world, in that the UNFCCC has announced that they are going to do a world climate event sometime in summer, somewhere else. And I think they're not going to stop the green zone activity stuff for COP28 by any means, but I think doing an event at another time of year is sort of an attempt to see, could we draw people into something along those lines, which would also minimize the impact of COP summits, because if we had a world fair kind of thing and we hosted that, because the world fair piece could be hosted in slightly more logical places, shall we say?
Yeah.
In that, like, Sharm el-Sheikh didn't necessarily have the infrastructure to deal with that number of people descending on it in the way that they descended on it. But the COP summits have to move to a different jurisdiction each year, very naturally, because we have to be inclusive. We have to involve different areas of the world in this discussion and negotiation. Whereas the business sort of world fair kind of concept doesn't necessarily need to be as wide ranging. It can go to big central cities that can handle it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked in the exhibition industry for 20 years, and a lot of the what I'm seeing is a lot of the industries are in their own exhibitions are actually having a real focus on sustainability now. So the trade events are doing the business side of it. So
Yeah.
they're really, really including sustainability a lot more than they did before. You know, thinking back sort of 3 years ago, I remember, well, actually probably 4 years ago, given COVID, going to an event where sustainability wasn't on the agenda at all. And now every single trade event that I look at has a sustainability agenda, which is great. And actually, I think, like, moving on now, when you look at how the conversation, how far it's come, even for people, you know, businesses, to even wanting to have a net zero plan or a sustainability strategy or an ESG strategy, then that's come so far from where it was 4 or 5 years ago. I'm interested a little bit more about, you know, your organisation is, as you say, for accreditations, new credit businesses. There's lots of accreditations out there, you know, ISO, you mentioned, B Corp, CSR accreditation, lots and lots of different, hundreds of accreditations, I believe. But for businesses, what do you think, and obviously Planet Mark, but do you think that accreditations are important for businesses, and what kind of frameworks do you like to see, and how do you like to see them?
Yeah, so I think, I guess a couple of things is, you know, what are the benefits of being certified to something, right? Like, why do people go out and get a degree? Why do people want to, you know, have their progress on net zero certified? Why do people want to have their progress on, you know, CSR certified? And I think that, you know, there's a couple of things. One is that it's a good way of kind of testing yourself. You're seeing at what level am I at, and how can I compare myself in a relevant way to my peers and to other businesses. Where do I fit? The second is that it then gives you indications of, well, okay, what do I need to do to improve? How do I get better? And then the third thing is it allows you to then talk about that and share that messaging in a credible and authentic way with your customers, with your investors, with your suppliers. You know, you're able to sort of talk about it and say, no, I'm not just saying that I care about these things. Like, look, I've proof, I have evidence that I'm doing it. And so I think the key thing for me in terms of, you know, what makes a good, you know, certification kind of is, I think it needs to be a market, particularly when it comes to things like net zero carbon footprinting. It can't just be a rubber stamping exercise. It's not just about, hey, I've got, you know, my carbon footprint. Someone said that, yeah, that's my carbon footprint. It's not enough. Like, why are we doing a carbon footprint? To reduce it. Okay, so it needs to be a mark of progress. It needs to be, and so that's what Planet Mark certification is about, in that our members have to be reducing their carbon emissions year on year in order to recertify. And so when you see the Planet Mark icon on a product, on you know, in an office, on a certificate, you know that business has committed to and is making progress to reduce their emissions each year. That's that sort of sign of confidence. With B Corp, you know, we love B Corp, and B Corp's a really wonderful governance framework that goes much sort of broader in terms of scoring organizations on the basis of their wide effects, the policies they have in place, what governance they have in place. And so, you know, environmental sustainability and carbon is one part of that. So you'll get points on the B impact assessment if you, you know, you'll get points on it if you have an environmental management system, if you are demonstrating, you know, carbon emission reductions, if you have a net zero target, that scores you points. But it you know, it doesn't, that, you know, the B Corp don't help you measure your carbon footprint or help you reduce it. It's just that you score points if you are doing that. So yeah, B Corp is kind of a governance framework. So I think, you know, look for marks of progress, look for, you know, robust checking. The other thing is that there are a lot of the things that you'll see out there at the moment is they're kind of software as service type things, where you plug your numbers in, you get a result back, yay, I'm certified. But no one's checked that. Like, you could put whatever you wanted into the system and it will spit out a number. And they just kind of trust implicitly that you're putting the right numbers in. There's no errors there. There's no manipulation there. And one of the things that's now coming out in legislation and in standards, for both the ISO net zero guidelines, which Planet Mark was the first worldwide early adopter of, as well as European legislation, like the European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is sort of coming into effect over the next couple of years, and the European Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is coming out a couple of years after that, the UK Transition Plan Task Force Framework. All of these things call for third-party verification from a competent third party. You need your carbon footprint and your progress and your targets to be verified. And what that means is when we certify companies at Planet Mark, they give us their data, yeah, but they also have to submit evidence. So we want to see, you submit data saying, oh, this is how much energy we used, which we use to then convert it into, okay, that much energy equals that much carbon emissions. But we also want to see the invoices associated with your energy bills, because we're going to check and make sure that these things add up. And that's what the third-party verification piece is about, is it gives confidence in that certification, because you know that it's been independently verified.
Yeah, great. And actually, I think it's good to see these kind of the directives coming in and the structure, because there's a lot of confusion about what people need to do and have to do and should do, and it gives the guidance of where to start. What are your goals for? We're at the beginning of the year, so what are your goals for 2023?
I mean, so we're very impact focused. We're impact driven. So for us, it's all about how do we have the greatest impact, and our sort of big focus is around net zero and carbon emission reduction. So during 2022, I don't have the latest stats yet, but during 2022 up to the end of sort of November, we had measured more than like 115,000 tons of carbon emission reductions in businesses, and more than 180,000 tons of carbon emission reductions in construction, because we certify construction projects as well for progress, for reducing carbon emissions by taking sustainability initiatives to do changes to the design, the materials, the processes, the logistics, the supply chain, all of those things. We calculate the reduction of emissions associated with that in a life cycle assessment. So, overall, last year we would have measured with our members around 300,000 tons of carbon emission reductions. So when we come to this year and setting our strategy for this year, the question is, okay, 300,000 tons last year, what's it going to take to get to 500,000 tons or 1 million tons or 10 million tons? And that's how we kind of set our trajectory. And there are two ways that we do that. Number one is supporting our members and our community to do more and be very hands-on, very proactive in supporting them to understand and make more progress individually with each company themselves. So we're investing more in doing that. And then the second thing is to grow the community of organizations who are making this commitment. And so by the end of the year, I'd love to see us grow from sort of 650 members to 800, 900,000. We're going to engage more in policy this year, in particular, in terms of supporting the development of it to make sure that it meets the standards that we would expect to see of legislation, of standards of policy, but also then helping our members keep way ahead of the curve, because there's no easier way of keeping ahead of the curve than if you're one of the ones designing it. So we're leaning into that. We're helping develop the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard right now as one of the working groups. We're implementing the ISO Net Zero guidelines out there. And we'll be engaging in a lot of other things and making sure that we're representing the voice of our members and community in those discussions and at that table. So, like, for instance, when next Monday or Tuesday, we expect the UK government's net zero review to be released. We will be reviewing that, digesting it, and trying to make sense of what does that mean for our members. And what's our feedback and response to it on the basis of what we know our members will, the impact it will have on them.
Yeah. And we're coming to the end. I always like to ask this from people like you. I know you're connected to lots of people in the sector, but who inspires you? Who should people be listening to, following? What kind of books to read?
So I'd probably flag my favorite podcast is Outrage and Optimism, and that's Christiana Figueres, Tom Rivett-Carnac, and Paul Dickinson. And the podcast is fantastic, but it's worth following each of those people individually because they are legends.
Yeah.
Where Christiana Figueres was the sort of architect of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. She was sort of executive secretary of the UN climate change sort of committee at that time. And Tom Rivett-Carnac was sort of her right hand as part of that process. And then Paul Dickinson was the founder of CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, back in 2000. And so they're people who have, really given their all already to taking climate action. And they inspire me a great deal, particularly because of their candidness about it, about the need for balancing that outrage and the optimism, and, how we, chart a path to a future that we choose and a future that we're all hopeful for. And there's, Christiana and Tom have a book called The Future We Choose. And, that's really what this is all about, right? Even outside of the realms of sustainability and carbon emissions, what future do we want to live in? Like, what do we want the world to feel like in 2050? What do we want it to look like? Where will we live? What sort of houses will we live in? How will we make energy? How will we travel? What products will we buy, and where will they come from? How will they arrive to us? How will they have been made? What food will we eat? Where will that have been made? How will it have traveled to us? Is it a local kind of thing? Really, one of the things that we're going to be doing this year, this is our 10th anniversary this year for Planet Mark. And one of the things we'll be doing this year is really thinking about that and reflecting a lot on that. Is what is our vision for the future? What world do we want to live in? And that's as much about living in a sustainable world as it is about living in a world where, people are treated with dignity, and we see honesty in our politicians. We see, innovation across all different realms of life, and that social justice and social empowerment is just as much at the core of sustainability as carbon emissions. So I'm looking forward to going through that reflection, and we'll watch this space, because we'll be having these kinds of reflections around what we think what we hope the world will look like in 10 years and in 20 years and in 2050, and setting out a vision for what we want to see from that. So I'm excited to do that.
And I'm excited to read it and see it and hear about it. And we'll have to jump on another podcast when you're ready to reveal that. And I think that's a really great way to end this podcast. And it's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you. And, keep doing what you do. And I hope to speak to you again really, really soon. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Sam.